Thank you. Good morning, all. Wow, it's a true pleasure to be here. And it is only 10:30, and on the program we should start now with you, Jerry. It's really a pleasure to be back in Prague and to see so many friends that I've met over the last couple of years, and congratulations to Victor and Psychedelic Europe for putting this together. It's really a wonderful effort to see how far we have come. What I will do with you in the next minutes, I don't know how much time I have, maybe I have much more, I don't know, is give a sort of a perspective of where this may be going. And I will zoom out and I will zoom in, as you will recognize in my presentation. I am going to start with the fact that mental health disorders are expected to continue to rise over the next couple of years, over the next decade. It's a grim situation if we look what is out there in the future. We've heard something about COVID, and we will see major depressive disorder. We will see anxiety disorders, including PTSD, in the years to come, especially also in the younger generation. We see severe mental illness. We shouldn't shy away. That is a situation that we will be seeing in the next probably decade. The economic and the social impacts of untreated mental health issues are substantial. There is a critical need for innovation. As we heard from Jerry, we need to innovate. We need to think outside of the box, and I will come back to that. Enhanced mental health services and support systems are in dire need. If we look at the challenges to 2024, we'll hear more about that in the panels. Then we have a couple of things. COVID-19 was there. Stigma is still around us. Mental health and stigma is still there. I come from a military background, and stigma in the military is driving people to stiff upper lip, to not talk about, to disclose. We have workplace mental health. We have burnout. As we heard, some people don't like to work in specific situations. There's high burnout in specific settings. The variability of the accessibility to mental health services for people is, depending on where you live, variable. If we look now in Ukraine, there's so many services that are imploded. They're not there. So we need to think in ways to deliver mental health in a novel way. Maybe digital is a way to go. We see the impact of geopolitical events. As we see, the war is not over. Ukraine is still at war. Europe is indirectly at war with whom? Of course, with the people who are invading Ukraine. We see an increased prevalence of PTSD, and what we will see is an increased prevalence of intergenerational manifestation of trauma. These are young kids who grow up in trauma. I was born in 1961. My parents were born in 1931. My parents were adolescent when the Germans occupied our country for 5 years. It has been under my skin, even though I've lived in peace for 75 years. So we will see a generation that's growing up that will be dramatically affected by these events. Financial constraints, of course, are also there. And we need to integrate and coordination. So that is the sort of the challenges that we have to meet. So can we think outside of the box? Are there thought leaders that could inspire us? You know, Edward de Bono, maybe some of you do, lateral thinking. Maybe Steve Jobs. We come out the time of some of you have grown up with the iPhone. I was born when the iPhone was not there, but there's a whole generation that is now profiting from a way of communication and AI 4.0. Have you familiarized yourself with the capacities, with what can do? I sometimes have the text and I check it in 4.0 and then see, oh wow, I could have said that better. Do you know this little trick? You need to connect 9 dots with 4 straight lines without lifting your pen from the paper. I'm not going to dwell long about this. Some people feel like, hey, this is a trick, Eric. This cannot be solved, right? This is one of these tricks that are impossible. This is a solution. The solution to a problem often can be such that we have to think outside of the box. If you want to connect these 9 dots, you have to create 2 additional dots outside of the imaginary box of these 4 to solve the trick. Well, that is just a metaphor for the solution that probably we have to think. Think outside of the box. How can we think outside of the box? Then we have to be aware of the box that we're creating for ourselves. Now, one more before I go into depth. Yuri said briefly there, actually this is a slide to compare psychiatry with neurology. Where are the new leads, the new innovations in psychiatry and neurology as an example? Well, my concern in psychiatry is lagging behind in the discovery of new compounds. For years, when I was a resident, there were all these industry partners that were saying, hey, we've got a new compound here, we got a new SSRI, we've got a new one here. They're gone. The big pharma companies are gone. They're no longer interested in mental health. They've moved up to vaccination. They've moved to other fields where there's money to make. There's also no new compounds. If you compare neurology to psychiatry, neurology has, over the last decade, 120 new compounds that are on the market for Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, etc., dementia. Psychiatry is lagging behind. There's only 20 new compounds that have been filed for registration, out of which only 2 for a disorder that's close to my heart, which is PTSD. Do you know that PTSD has only 2 registered medications? Paroxetine and sertraline. You know when they were registered for the treatment of PTSD? 2001. That's more than 20 years ago. So we're in a bad shape when it comes to new medication for a very prevalent disorder like PTSD. So where to start? Are there any new ideas? Are there any new compounds? Are there any new models that we can employ? Well, we've heard about the psychedelic. Is that the solution then? Is the psychedelic renaissance the solution to all what I just covered? This comes from the New York Times from like about a year ago. Psychiatry may never be the same. I do not know. I hesitate to think that we're at a psychiatric renaissance. It may go much slower than we think. Actually, there is a paper by Dan Stein. He's a psychiatrist in South Africa, Cape Town. And he wrote this paper. He said, psychiatric diagnosis and treatment in the 21st century, paradigm shifts versus incremental integration. It may take time before we are able to integrate these psychedelic ideas into mainstream mental health. It's not going to be next year. And as we heard from Alexis, it was 10 years ago compared to now, yes, there are changes and we need to pursue. But to talk about a revolution, I don't know. But the good news is that we have a lot of new compounds. All these compounds are familiar for you, otherwise I think you wouldn't be here. We've got MDMA. I'll talk about MDMA more. Psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, ayahuasca. Is there any industry that is making money out of this? They're not blockbusters. No, not yet or so. Maybe there are. Is there a business model for these compounds? They've been around for a long time. We know them. We know their value recreationally, some therapeutically, quite a few. So my focus, as I've been in the military for 25 years, I was wearing the uniform, and I've been treating soldiers who either were going on a mission or came back from a mission and suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder. And as we only see, PTSD or trauma does not only come in the military, in the uniformed personnel, it also is in society. Sexual abuse, assaults, it's violence, the wars that we're working indirectly in. But the consequence of trauma is widespread. I fear that a lot of veterans who've been fighting in the East come back, start drinking, start becoming violent. Maybe suicide will go up in Ukraine because of the difficulty to cope with the grief and the losses There were hundreds of people killed on one day only. So how can you mourn about such large population that is no longer there? So we think there's only a good message. Yeah, there is mourning and there's grief, there's complicated grief, there's going to be pain, there's going to be depression, insomnia. So trauma is something that's close to my heart, to see what can we do to mitigate trauma. Well, okay, maybe these psychedelic trials will help us to get a grip on treating PTSD or trauma. There's a lot of research literature now out there. There's a lot of trials about psychedelics. I just checked, 45 studies are on psychedelics and PTSD, out of which 31 with MDMA, of which 19 have been completed, and 6 with psilocybin, of which 1 has completed. So there are trials, a lot of trials that are using psychedelics to treat PTSD. Maybe that's a lead for something, but what's there? Maybe this is the working mechanism that psychedelics for PTSD have at hand. What I put there is a reappraisal of the value of transformative experiences. A reappraisal of the value of transformative experiences. You know Stan Grove, right? He grew up here. He's your countryman. He was talking about the value, the true value of a transformative experience. If you suffer from PTSD, something has changed your life dramatically. Your life is no longer the same. So you have to transform in a way, maybe to transform your way back or so. LSD, MDMA, psilocybin have the capacity, I strongly believe, to contribute to transformative experience. Jan Bastiaans in my country, actually Jan Bastiaans was a professor at Leiden University Medical Center who helped people to transform their experiences by giving them LSD. This is from the Haaretz paper, an Israeli newspaper that wrote a paper on Jan Bastiaans, the Dutch psychiatrist who treated traumatized Holocaust survivors with LSD. This was in the 70s. This is 50 years ago. What Jan Bastiaans was doing was, before we even know PTSD, when these concentration camp survivors came back to the Netherlands, he gave them a name for a disorder, because we didn't have PTSD at that time. He called it concentration camp syndrome. And he treated them with PTSD. If you're really interested in this, you should read a book, Kate Setnick, by Yehiel de Nur. Yehiel de Nur was a writer who was in Auschwitz for a long time, and he needed to testify to Eichmann in 1961. He'd been writing about his experiences in Auschwitz, but always in another personality, with another name. He gave himself the name Kate Setnick, the name that he had in the camp. He never gave him the name Yehiel de Nur. When he testified to Eichmann, he had to stand trial, and he had to look Eichmann in the eyes, and he had to tell the jury what his real name was. And then he had sort of two compatibilities, Kate Setnick and Yehiel de Nur, and they collapsed. Literally, he collapsed. He fell on the floor. These realities between a sort of a denial of the reality of Auschwitz and a true reliving of Auschwitz were incompatible with another. He collapsed on the floor. Story you want to make is he called Jan Bastiaans. He had 4 LSD sessions, and they are described in this book, Shividi. The 4th session was transformative for him. It's a beautiful session. You should read the narrative. And you know what he sees? Now, I can talk to this audience perhaps because you will understand. He saw through the eyes of a Nazi how his mother was dragged in the gas chamber. Think that through. That is bizarre. But it helped him to overcome his survivor guilt. That's not a thing that you can think up. This is something he felt deep within his soul. He awoke after the LSD experience, and his nightmares sort of dissolved. We're all humans. He had the capacity to experience the Nazis were also humans. There is a sort of a forgiveness, a humanistic approach to that. Well, you cannot think it up, you have to relive that, right? You have to feel that. beautiful. There is now a book, Return from the Other Planet, that just came out. Asaf Lapid is an Israeli filmmaker who made a film about the life of Yildiner and about what this means in the current debate in Gaza and Israel. It's very, who's the victim and who's the aggressor? Okay, there's lots of books, Psychedelic Integration, Stan Grof and others, and probably you have read them. And I encourage students of medicine or others, they need to read these books. I encourage them to read this old material from Timothy Leary and others to see their appetite. So, long story short, MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Drug Studies. Started with Rick Doblin as the director's trials. Let's focus on one compound, MDMA for treatment of PTSD. They started in 2001, which is already 20 years ago, writing a proposal to the FDA, and they did the first trial. Then they got 24, the first participant enrolled, and by 2016, they had 6 trials completed. And by 2017, they had the breakthrough therapy assignment, which is a major step. We in the Netherlands did also start in the open label phase, and I was the PI of the first study in the Netherlands. But where are we now? 2 phase 3 trials have been performed on MDMA-assisted therapy for the treatment of PTSD. You just briefly told about that. If you're not familiar with that, it's not one drug that you take and then it will flow. No, it is one drug for 8 hours, and then integrative sessions between you get another drug, the MDMA, and then 3 integrative sessions, and you get a third session. So it's 3 drug therapy sessions with interspersive therapies, normal psychotherapies, that are the package of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy over a period of about 3 months. The idea is that oxytocin, there's an oxytocin-dependent reopening of a social reward learning, which is critical, mobilized by MDMA. Oxytocin is a big prosocial hormone, and that's where you love the other, where you get more connected to your own symptoms, and there's no negative reappraisal of the reliving of the experience. And the setting is a beautiful setting where people are at pace, at their time, to relive whatever they want to relive. So that's it. Dose, as Alexis said, dose is so important. 80 to 120 milligrams, maybe a boost session of 160 milligrams. We never give more. We never give more. Is there any craving afterwards? No, there's no craving. MDMA is not an addictive compound. Don't people like, hey, I want to have more MDMA. It rarely occurs. This was what was, when I was in the audience, like some of you may know, this blew my mind. This is Michael Miethofer, and Rick Doblin was presenting these cases. He said, oh, this is the placebo group. You see, they come from 80, and after 3 sessions, they're back at 60. Wonderful. That's a fairly substantial drop. But this is the group with MDMA. And I felt like, shit. That is either not true, it's too good to be true, or it's not true. Well, this is replicated by now. This is replicated, so many citations. But this was the landmark study that initiated, so people said, like, wow, if that is the effect of MDMA as therapy, we have a moral imperative to study it. I think that's where we are now. And that got me excited, actually, honestly. That got me out of my chair. Now we have these phase 3 studies. Do we really have a signal? So we have the recreational narrative, and we have here now the ability to turn medicine, to turn MDMA into a medicine. Then it is, quote unquote, gold. Oh yeah, that's me when I was wearing the uniform. I'm retired, and I see the suffering, of course. We all see the suffering of your clinical. I see the suffering in veterans that have returned from like Dutch bat, Srebrenica. I just have to call you one mission or so, but I see this, and they cannot get out of there, right? So you'd like to help them. MDMA can give wonders. Just briefly. Oh, is there no sound to this? Can you beef up the sound, please?
Thinking about it, that moment that I got blown up when it was happening, and everything was moving so slow, and my mind was just racing at the speed of light. It was, and I can really go back and visualize. I've never been able to visualize it so hard before. I can really feel what it was like, and there was this.
So this guy was reliving an experience where sea bass was blown up in his Bushmaster. There was incoming fire from the Taliban, and he couldn't save sea bass. He was burned into his vehicle, and he could see sea bass. Here, these few sentences are the reliving of that experience. And what he says, in slow motion, he could relive that experience. And in the reliving of that experience, there's a transformative experience. There actually is a forgiveness aspect. I did everything I could, but I could not rescue sea bass. And now going back, I did everything I can let it go. Of course, there's more to it, but I just wanted to give you that little vignette of how transformative that can be. So we looked at the integrative sessions of the ones that responded to MDMA-assisted therapy, and we look at what is now the driver, what is the working mechanism of these transformative experiences with Masha Godes, and what are the change phenomena really with MDMA-assisted therapy? Well, it is the tolerance of the conflict. Typically, if we do EMDR or cognitive process therapy, people don't want to go there. It's too frightening to relive that experience. With MDMA, they can stay there. They can staying with what is. They don't shy away. They can process the trauma with insight, reflecting, with mental clarity. They can have positive emotions of self-acceptance, of joy, happiness, interpersonal, compassion, empathy, and a connection, a kind of a wider perspective, or the inner healer intelligence. It's kind of a weird, flaky term, maybe. Inner healer intelligence. Your consciousness is a hell of a lot smarter than you are. It knows where you need to go to get the pain away. Okay, well, we've seen the treatment responses. Actually, August 11, we will hope is my bias, but we'll expect the results from the FDA committee to see if MDMA-assisted therapy will be endorsed, registered for the treatment of PTSD. It will be the third compound after sertraline and paroxetine to make it into the registration. Huge, if we get there. Of course, there are lots of psychological mechanisms. We won't go into this in detail, way over time. This is even more detail, all the studies that are out there now. If you look at the p-values of this, the p-values are through the roof. They're very strong. And of course, as we go closer to the finish line, there's always people who say like, well, can we tore it down? Can we deconstruct these data? Are they biased or so? Sure, but they've been published. They've been scrutinized. The p-values are very, very strong. This is now a group of people, and you may like, I don't know them, I'm on it, but I'm part of a state committee. Last year, when we still had a parliament, but we're up, we get one now as well, that said, let's look at the health effects of MDMA. Let's look at the health effects of MDMA. And there's a couple of angles to this, because we're a big producer of MDMA in the Netherlands, right? MDMA mostly comes from the Netherlands. There's also a problem with MDMA in the Netherlands. What is it? Waste. People drop in the illegal labs, they drop their waste in a town in the south of the Netherlands. And it's dramatic because the local municipalities have to clean it up. The costs are dramatic. So we have a health effect, and we look at that, and we write our report. There is also a criminal effect that we have to sort of accommodate. But we'll file our report, and we will hand our report the 6th of June to the Minister of Health. We're pretty proud of that. So, I'll skip this. So briefly, I'll close up. What are the potential risks or challenges do you foresee if MDMA-assisted therapy is approved? Well, there is a risk of inadequate therapist training. Because you need to be trained in order to work with these compounds. It's not just, I'll follow an online course and I can do it. How does the public perceive MDMA-assisted therapy in your country? Well, mixed opinions. So we have to get that discourse, like how do we get this into the proper mental health care? This was, as a reminder, 2018 when Ray Doblin and some others went to the FDA, to the EMA, where we're dealing with Europe. We're not dealing with the FDA, we're dealing with Europe. Also in the Czech, we're dealing with Europe. and the EMA. So they went to the EMA. EMA, help us. What do we need to do to register MDMA in Europe? The EMA said, well, you need to do one pivotal 70-person phase 3 study. You know what it cost? A lot of money. And nobody has the money to do this study. And that's a problem. It's about 30 million that nowadays a study costs. And we're trying to negotiate with the EMA like way. But the EMA says, well, this is the chairman of the EMA, he says, well, let's give a second chance to psychedelics. So I think what we need to do here is we need to foster a multi-level approach in Europe. And I think I'm so happy to speak here, and with seeing Thomas and seeing all others, we need to get together, and we need to do this together, because it's the EMA wants to have that 70-patient study. We need to find funds and find resources to convince that Europe can follow this. There is no mutual recognition from the US to the EU. When it is approved in the US, people are starting to say like, hey, and what about us? And we've got nothing. So that goes underground. We see all the problems when it goes underground. We don't want to go there. We want to have it up the ground. We want to have it legalized, registered. So there are challenges that we have to face for the decade or so to come. And it's not going to fix everything mental health-wise that I started in the beginning. No. It's not a magical cure for everything. But at least it's a lead if we take it serious. This is just a last slide. This is a beautiful castle. It's close to Leiden, where we started about 5-6 years ago with a group, the Castle and the Gaze group. And now you see so many companies like us, Compass, Beckley Tech, Usain, Atai, many others are preparing for a future. And if we do this right together with you here, a wonderful meeting, and the rest of the presentations today, we can mitigate some of the dramatic symptoms that people have when they're facing traumatic stress. With that, I'd like to close. Thank you very much for your attention.